So in the year since I did my review of the at-game Sega Genesis Ultimate Portable Game Player, there have been a few developments. Mostly, the NES Mini has managed to piss everybody the fuck off! Not to turn this video into a huge rant, but what the hell is wrong with you, Nintendo? You managed to create one of the most sought-after gaming products in recent memory, and then you decided to just pull the plug, forcing everyone to resort to spending hundreds of dollars buying one secondhand from a scalper. The exact same thing happens with your amiibo. I don't know who's the bigger idiot here, the people manufacturing them in such small numbers, or the people that actually pay the exorbitant prices for them. And then, before we even have time to recover, what do? They announce the Super NES Mini! At least they seem to be learning from their mistakes this time. Supposedly, they'll be manufacturing them in greater numbers, which they damn well better because there's going to be even more demand since it contains the never-before-released Star Fox 2. So naturally, we have to look at the logical progression. We have an NES Classic and a Super NES Classic, so it's only a matter of time before we get an N64 Classic. And personally, I think they should stop there. The GameCube just isn't old enough to have the same nostalgic value that Nintendo is trying to capitalize on, but the Nintendo 64 does. And while I personally don't think many of the games have aged well, I will fully admit that a lot of them do deserve their time in the spotlight once again. So let's take a look at what I would hope to see on the inevitable Nintendo 64 Classic. First of all, let's start with the ones that are guaranteed. Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, Star Fox 64, Kirby 64, Pilot Wings 64, and of course, Ocarina of Time, aka Zelda 64. These are all first-party Nintendo games, beloved classics on the system, and there's absolutely no reason they would be left off. These are games that need no introduction, and they are flagship titles that help define the Nintendo 64. Everybody who knows the N64 knows these games. We can use that as a starting point, and from there we can get into games that have a high chance, but may have one or two reasons to leave them off. Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. The only thing I can think of is maybe they would consider it redundant to have both games. It's not quite as popular as Ocarina of Time, but it's still a solid game with many fans. I can't see them choosing this one instead of Ocarina, but I can see them choosing both. Of course, since both of these games have remakes on the 3DS, Nintendo might see it as cutting into their sales. Pokemon Snap. Maybe they'll consider it a lost cause if you can't export your photos in any way, but there's still a solid and family-friendly rail shooter here. Paper Mario, one of the only RPGs on the system and a damn good one. This is one that I would almost put on the guaranteed list, but it is a bit of a departure from what people picture when they think of the N64. Pokemon Puzzle League, a desperate addition to the N64's starving puzzle game genre. It's a port of Panel de Pon released on the Super NES as Tetris Attack, and that name would go on to bite them in the ass because they had to license it from the Tetris company, even though the game itself has nothing to do with Tetris. There's a reason there hasn't been a re-release on the Virtual Console for that game, but there has for this one, so I can definitely see it on here. Super Smash Bros. And Mario Party. I'm lumping these two together because the two caveats are pretty much the same. These games help justify the N64's 4 controller slots, and while I don't doubt they would give the N64 Classic 4 slots as well, I really don't see them shipping it with 4 controllers. But hey, maybe Nintendo will use it as a reason to push buying more controllers separately. Oh, who am I kidding? We know they will. As for Mario Party, I will admit I never really played it much myself, so I can't decide which of the three would be best, something that there's a lot of debate over anyway. So I'll just let you decide and say any of the three is equally likely. Mario Golf and Mario Tennis. A couple of fun sports titles like this would do a great job of rounding out the variety on the system. And finally, F-Zero X. Every console collection needs a solid racing game, as seeing as F-Zero went on to become another staple of the Nintendo family, this probably has a better chance than others of making it in. From the 9 games here, I'd say choose 7 to go on the list. That brings us to 13. Next up, we'll look at the games that, honestly, could go either way. GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. Okay, here's the big one. Nintendo is going to fight tooth and nail to get licensing for these games. For many people, GoldenEye alone would be enough to buy the system and 4 controllers. But Rare is owned by their competitor Microsoft now. If I had to choose, I'd say Perfect Dark was a more likely choice because otherwise Nintendo would also have to secure the rights to the James Bond license, which is just one more legal hurdle to jump through. But frankly, I would be more surprised if these games made it on than if they were left off. Donkey Kong 64. It's a first-party game, technically, but after Nintendo's falling out with Rare in recent years, I wouldn't be surprised if this was skipped. While undeniably popular, Super Mario 64 is already a spectacular 3D platformer, so adding this might be a bit redundant. Not that we couldn't use another, like, for example, Space Station Silicon Valley and Rocket Robot on Wheels. Two excellent 3D platformers that would really help flesh out the genre the N64 was best at. Not as many people know about these games as a lot of the others on the system, but they really should get their chance in the sun. Yoshi's Story. Again, first-party game, so no licensing issues. It's a game that's loved by many, but I seem to recall Nintendo being rather ambivalent toward it after its release. It was kind of critically panned when it came out for its short length and being a major step down from Yoshi's Island, so they may not consider it to be worth their time anymore. Mischief Makers, a beloved game made by a company with a fairly positive relationship with Nintendo. This seems like a really good fit for the system. Bomberman 64, another game that kicks ass in multiplayer. Hudson has a pretty good relationship with Nintendo too, especially with the release of the new Super Bomberman R, so this would be a great addition to the lineup. Wave Race 64 and 1080 Snowboarding. There is a bit of product placement in these from companies like Kawasaki and Tommy Hilfiger, so that might cause some issues, but nothing too bad. From these 10, I'd say choose 5 to add to the main list, bringing us to 18 overall. Now let's think of the games that have a fairly low chance of appearing. Not that I don't expect any of these to be on the N64 Classic, but I don't think they'll make up a very large percentage. Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Killer Instinct, Blast Corps, Jet Force Gemini, pretty much anything else made by Rare. Like I said, Rare is owned by Microsoft now, and that surprisingly takes out a lot of the potential N64 library. The same can be said for Diddy Kong Racing. It's based on a Nintendo property, and some would argue it's even better than Mario Kart, but it seems a bit redundant when they already have the much beloved Mario Kart 64 on the list that requires no licensing agreements. I'd say it's another Majora's Mask situation. I could see both, but not just this one. Harvest Moon 64. Now here's an interesting one. This game only recently came out on the Wii U Virtual Console, much to the delight of many fans, but I wouldn't quite consider it a flagship title that the general public associates with the N64. Nintendo seems to be much more interested in pushing their similar series Animal Crossing, but since that never came out for the N64, it almost did but it didn't, this would be a damn fine substitute. Quest 64. Really, I wouldn't be surprised if they put this on there just to have another RPG. The N64 was rather infamously devoid of that genre. Cruisin' World, another classic game, but the same can be said about pretty much anything on this system, right? It would be nice to see, but it's not really a necessary title, especially if other arcade games like Wave Race and 1080 make it on. And lastly, Ogre Battle 64. Like Quest 64, I'd wager this would be included just to have some sort of RTS on the system. Let's see, from this rather vague group, choose maybe 3 games. That puts us at 21, tied with the Super NES Classic. Finally, let's see some games that I would be shocked if they made it onto this system. Many of these have legal issues and other factors that would take quite a bit of work to secure. Mega Man 64. Capcom probably wants to forget this game exists. The N64 port is pretty widely regarded as crap, so don't hold your breath. Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2. Would anyone want to play Pokemon Stadium without the ability to use your own Pokemon? I guess some people would, and there are a few minigames on here, but I think there's a good reason this game hasn't been re-released on the Virtual Console. Mortal Kombat Trilogy, Carmageddon, Doom 64, Body Harvest. As much as it would be awesome to see, I don't think Nintendo would jump through too many hoops to secure these M-rated games. StarCraft 64. No. Just no. Turok. Again, an M-rated first-person shooter seems to clash with what Nintendo might be trying to project with this system. Also, Acclaim went bankrupt in 2004, so the brand has been floating around nebulously for a while, with a home that seems to be anywhere but a Nintendo system. And finally, anything Star Wars or WWF. Yeah, that takes a lot out. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I'd imagine the licensing for these games would be a nightmare. Of these, I'd say maybe 1 if we're lucky, giving us a grand total of 22. And there you have my list for what I expect to see on the inevitable Nintendo 64 Classic. For a system that I originally thought only had a handful of great games, I think it's pretty solid, honestly. It will be fun to take a look at this list again when it's actually announced, but I would have no problem throwing down $80-$90 for a system with a collection of games like this. But I suppose that all relies upon Nintendo actually manufacturing enough for people to buy them! Until then, everybody, have fun and happy gaming.